Hi, welcome to another episode of Author Spotlight. My name is Lucy, and on this episode, I'm going to be doing something a little different. Rather than just telling you about the works of one author, which is what I've done in the past, I'm going to tell you about 4 different debut novels. The reason that I wanted to do this is that on this series, I am highlighting authors who have written more than one thing, and I have read in the past couple of years some really great debut novels, and so I wanted to give those a chance to shine as well. So the first book I want to tell you about is called Olga Dies Dreaming, and this is by Xochitl Gonzalez. And this is a book about a wedding planner named Olga Acevedo, and the author, Xochitl, was actually a wedding planner herself at one point, so she writes about what she knows here. And the wedding planning parts of this book are very humorous. The book starts right out with Olga trying to decide which napkins to get for a wedding, and you realize how much money and time is put into the wedding industry. This is a business that Olga has built by herself. She lives in Brooklyn. She is of Puerto Rican descent, and she has been raised by her grandmother along with her brother Prieto. They were raised by their grandmother because their mother left to go fight for Puerto Rico's independence. This book has occasional letters written to them from their mother, who has very strong opinions about how both Olga and Prieto should be living their lives. What both Olga and her brother are trying to do is pursue the American dream in their own way. Olga by building up this wedding planning business, and Prieto is a U.S. congressman who represents Brooklyn and has a special interest in Puerto Rico. So this book takes place in Brooklyn, which is also where the author lives. And one thing Olga has heard from her mother repeatedly is how disappointed her mother is in her for selling out to the capitalist system that is the United States. Whereas Olga has really become sort of this Martha Stewart type figure. She has appearances on TV shows. She plans weddings for very rich, well-known people. She's really built quite a business. She cannot find love herself, and it is something that she is seeking. Her brother, the congressman, is as well, but he's hiding the fact that he is gay. So that's one of the many secrets that runs throughout this book. They each also have sort of secret dealings in their lives. Part of Olga's business is who she deals with in order to procure the things that she gets for the weddings, how she gets such a good price on alcohol, for instance. Prieto is involved in a political scandal that's being kept secret. So there are all these parts of the book that are unknown to the community in which these siblings live. This book is very funny, especially a lot of the scenes involving the wedding planning, and the way that this author creates Olga is also very funny. The writing around her and Olga's voice and the way that Olga commands the people around her. There's a lot of humor. The book also gets into some more serious issues, such as trying to pursue the American dream while facing this sort of corrupt system, and also trying to protect your neighborhood against gentrification. And then ultimately there is this thing that comes to light that is happening in Puerto Rico with Olga's mother and the truth about that story. So there is a lot packed into this book. You have these personal stories, these cultural stories, these political stories, these international stories, but really the main focus of this book is Olga, and it is her voice that the author renders so well, and it's really Olga's quest to find her own relationship while she is bringing other people together. So this came out right in the beginning of 2022, and it was a lot of fun to read. The next debut novel I want to tell you about is called Disorientation, and this is by Elaine Chou. This story is a satire. It is about a PhD student named Ingrid Yang, and she is trying to finish her dissertation. It has taken her about 8 years. She's trying to write it on this famous Asian American poet, Chou. He's on syllabuses throughout the country and the world. He's held up as this mentor. But the thing that we find out about this man pretty early on is that he is not actually Chinese. He is a white American man who originally wrote a poem under this Chinese name and then realized the success he had and continued to do so. This is actually based on something that really did happen in 2015, and the author wanted to write about it because she felt like it, as she says, smacked of such white privilege and entitlement that this man felt he had the right to slip this name on and off when he thought it could benefit him. Yet in his real life, he continued to enjoy the privileges and the protection that his whiteness offered him. So the difference between the real life scenario and the book is that the poet in the book doesn't slip this name on and off. He becomes so successful that he dresses up as a Chinese person. He's essentially wearing yellowface and going out into the world. Ingrid and her friend Eunice discover this through some sleuthing that they do. And so it really becomes difficult still for Ingrid to continue to write her dissertation, knowing what she knows now about this. The satirical part of this book comes into play in the Asian American Studies department, first of all, in this university. All of the faculty are white, non-Asian people. Ingrid herself has a lot of internalized racism. She really believes in this idea of whiteness. So you have this white-dominated East Asian Studies department. You have this main character who's internalized this white supremacy, but it's written just so matter of fact that it is very funny, and that's the strength of the satire. It's also a successful satire because the author's writing about something that already exists in the real world. Ingrid is incredibly naive, and she just goes along with what she's been told and what has been held up to her as this ideal. There's this other character, Vivian Vo, and she is sort of a direct foil to Ingrid. She is very vocal about the problems with the East Asian Studies department and white privilege in general and white supremacy and the way that women are treated and the way that Asian American women specifically are treated. So she really outwardly shows a lot of rage, and this book addresses that as well by showing how much women have to hide that rage. So we have Ingrid and Vivian, and then Ingrid's best friend Eunice, and Ingrid is engaged to a white man who is a Japanese translator, despite the fact that he can't speak Japanese. So he translates these books, like specifically this book that this Japanese woman has written, and he just translates it into sort of what he feels it should be. And so again, this deals with that appropriation idea and the privilege of whiteness and the ability of white men to do what they want. Ingrid is afraid of saying the word white, sort of believing that she is colorblind, but what she's really doing is buying into this idea of whiteness. But through everything that she discovers about the late poet whom she's trying to write her dissertation about, what she discovers about her fiance, how her interactions with Vivian start to turn out, she finds herself becoming an activist in a way. And the book sort of takes a turn. It's a really great read. It's humorous. The satirical elements are done so well, just pointing out the absurdity of the way that whiteness really rules, internalized racism and appropriation, all these things that were really boiled down to this story that is absurd, but incredibly intelligent and extremely relevant. The next debut novel that I want to tell you about is called What the Fireflies Knew, and this is by Kai Harris. It also came out in 2022, and it is the story of KB, who is a 10-year-old Black girl. The story takes place in Michigan in the 1990s. I read in an interview with the author that she said she wanted to write a Black girlhood story that was immersive for the reader, that was as authentic as possible and unfiltered. And the way that she chooses to do that is to make the point of view of this book from the eyes of this 10-year-old. It's her voice. The book is told in this present tense, and that really adds to the immersiveness and the immediacy of the story. It starts with KB being sent to live with her grandfather after her father dies of an overdose and her family loses their home in Detroit. So her mother has to send KB and her sister off to live with their grandfather, from whom they are estranged, in Lansing, Michigan. When KB and her sister get there, the grandfather's very grumpy, he's very cold. KB's older sister, who up until this point has been a really good friend to her, also sort of becomes distant. She doesn't seem to have time for her anymore. And the only people around for her to play with are the family that live next door. They're white neighbors, and KB is not really allowed to play with them. Those children's parents forbid it, so they sort of have to sneakily play together. And that is really the only interaction that KB has. The whole book takes place over the course of this one summer, and we really get a sense of KB trying to figure out this new world. She's sort of been turned upside down. Her father died. He is being labeled as a fiend. Her mother stopped smiling. Her sister, who was her best friend, is no longer friendly with her. And so all of these things are just making her feel lonely, resentful, abandoned, and she kind of has to carve out her own space and her own identity. And it's really interesting to hear this from the point of view of a 10-year-old. We see the truth as she learns it. We understand how strange it feels to her. We see how vulnerable she is, but also how inquisitive she is in the way that a 10-year-old can be. And eventually, she really starts to grow up over this summer, and she learns more about why her grandfather is the way he is, and she learns more about her mother, and it really becomes this heartwarming story about family and KB's coming of age. It's not that it isn't without its tragic elements. It's just that Kai Harris has done such a wonderful job delivering the story to us through the eyes of KB. We really are immersed, and we see KB trying to build a life with what she has been given now in this time, in this summer. The last debut novel that I want to tell you about is called Abundance. This came out in 2021, and it is written by Jakob Guanzon, and this book was longlisted for the 2021 National Book Award for Fiction. It is the story of Henry, who at the beginning of the book has just gotten out of prison and is taking care of his son named Junior. Junior's mother is not in the picture at this time, and we start to learn details of Henry's life before Junior, Henry's life before prison, Henry's relationship with his wife. As we progress through the book does not take place in a chronologically linear fashion. The chapters go back and forth between the time that Henry and Junior are existing in now and the story that led them to where they are now. Henry lives on the edge of poverty. He has just really dollars to his name at this point. This book starts out with Henry trying to give Junior a nice birthday at McDonald's. And this is very much a book about how difficult it is to get out of poverty and the burden and the weight of poverty. What makes this book different than a lot of other books that tell that story of poverty is that each chapter begins with a dollar amount at the top. So we know currently how much money Henry has at that moment. So we see when he's at McDonald's that he has about $12, and there's this constant tallying of cost of things that he buys, gas in his car, food for his son. And this is such a strong factor in indicating the difficulty that Henry faces in trying to get out of poverty. Henry is where he is essentially because of a series of bad choices. We learn about those as we go back to Henry's story, and we see how one bad choice can really lead to another, and this snowball effect that has created this situation that Henry's really dug into. The money in the chapters is not always this tiny amount going down. There were times in the past where Henry was flush with money, and we see a much larger amount at the top of the chapter. And so this also really shows how fleeting it is for Henry. There's an interesting contrast between the monetary amounts at the beginning of these chapters and our awareness of how much Henry has compared to where we might see money and dollar figures in media a lot, which is usually in these huge amounts made by these very wealthy people with very large net worth. And so it's very powerful to see how the small amount of money that Henry has dictates the amount of dignity he feels and the amount of dignity he is afforded by other people, and generally points out this dichotomy of living and how much respect is connected to money. There's a very real sense of time when you're reading this book, though you're going back and forth in time, and that is in part because you understand the exact amount of money that Henry has. So you know when Junior gets sick what the cost is going to be to Henry. You understand the choice he has to make between food and gas. And you see the cycle of poverty that Henry is just stuck in. All these poor choices that Henry has made, he's really done out of love for his son and his desire for his son to have a different life, not to have to just be scraping by like Henry is. It's sad to see how the scraping by makes it so challenging for Henry to try and provide a different childhood for his son. You also see the monotony of poverty, how stultifying it can be to constantly have this dollar amount on your brain and be counting and counting and have it be at the forefront of everything. The structure of this book is so unusual, and the approach really does a great job of revealing the inequities in our society and the anxiety that exists around poverty and everything that that means: debt, addiction, incarceration, healthcare. All of these things are talked about in this book, where the actual real-time piece of it takes place in just a matter of days. So it has this fast-paced feel to it that makes it really difficult to put down. Although all four of these debut novels are very different in character and plot and structure, they all have some element of sort of this coming to consciousness, or this pulling back of layers, this sort of push and pull that the characters in the book are feeling for very different reasons in each story, but those elements are all there. I highly recommend any one of these books. I recommend all of these books. They were all really wonderful debuts.